She always cared for her sister as if she were her mother, until a cruel diagnosis changed everything. Alone, without family, without money, and without hope, she was forced to abandon her own dreams to save the only person she had left. But when she asked her arrogant boss for help, she received an unimaginable proposal in return. A dark agreement that wounded her deeply, but also paved the way for an impossible passion. From a very young age, Amara stopped living like a child. Her mother, Ngozi, supported the household with simplicity and love, but she passed away unexpectedly, a victim of a sudden fever that even doctors couldn't explain. Her absence left an unfillable void and forced Amara to grow up while still in her teens. On that day, standing before the small coffin holding the hand of her 8-year-old sister Chinasa, she made a silent promise. She would care for her, no matter the cost. It was a promise that would become both a burden and her greatest strength. There, Father Emeka, already consumed by alcoholism, became a ghost. In the early months, he showed up at home only to argue or demand money, until he vanished completely. No one ever knew if he had found another woman, got lost in the streets of Lagos, or simply gave up on life. For Amara and Chinasa, the harsh truth remained. They were alone in the world. The responsibility that fell on Amara forced her to take on bills, food, and care when she was barely old enough to look after herself. It was a suffocating burden, but one that shaped her courage in silence. In their small home in Surulere, a working-class neighborhood in the capital, the two learned to survive together. Amara woke before sunrise, prepared a thin bowl of pap for Chinasa, and dropped her off at school. Then she rushed to find temporary jobs, washing dishes in bars, sewing second-hand clothes for neighbors, carrying heavy bags at markets for a few coins. Every action was driven by necessity, not choice. Even with her body exhausted, she forced a smile when she got home, believing that hiding her pain was the only way to keep her sister's hope alive. Over time, Amara became a symbol of strength in the neighborhood. Many remarked that there was something different about her. While other girls her age dreamed of Ankara dresses for parties or talked about boyfriends, Amara was always calculating how to stretch the money from selling bread or testing budget recipes to feed her sister. To outsiders, she seemed overly mature. To those close to her, she was a rare example of resilience. But at night, when Chinasa fell asleep, Amara cried softly while looking at an old photo of their mother, seeking comfort in a face no longer there. The silence of the early hours was her only confidant. The bond between the sisters grew marked by closeness. Without birthday gifts or luxurious vacations, they created their own rituals. Every Friday, by candlelight, Amara spun stories, turning their room into a palace, an enchanted forest, or a magical Lagos market. Imagination became an escape from life's harshness. For Chinasa, it was like having a sister and a mother in one person. For Amara, it was the only way to believe there was still beauty amid the pain. But behind every invented smile lurked a persistent fear, failing the promise made at Ngozi's burial. It's curious how life gives new meaning to simple things. While many girls cherished memories of dresses or dolls, Amara treasured an old iron pot, inherited from her mother. Each time she cooked in it, she felt Ngozi's presence guiding her invisibly. To others, it was just a worn-out object. To Amara, it was proof that, even in the face of abandonment, there was still a firm root keeping her from crumbling. Perhaps it's these small symbols that hold up those who have lost nearly everything. To the world, system, Ara was just another young woman trying to survive in the urban jungle of Lagos. But for Chinasa, she was the entire universe. Every hard-earned coin, every improvised meal, every school notebook purchased hid stories of sacrifice that few would ever know. Little did she know, however, that fate would soon place her before even crueler choices, proving that promises of familial love sometimes demand soul-wrenching sacrifices. African Village Story is where pain, hope, and redemption meet in every chapter. Turn on the notification bell and don't miss the next episode of this journey that might change the way you see life. Amara's notebook still held the scribbles from when she dreamed of becoming a teacher. Each page spoke of a future that now seemed unattainable. The girl who always ranked among the top in her class faced the hardest day of her youth, informing the school principal that she wouldn't return to classes. The decision stemmed from an undeniable necessity. Without income, Chinasa wouldn't even have food to eat. The weight of abandoning the classroom was immense, but her love for her sister spoke louder. In that moment, Amara realized Some of life's battles leave no room for choices. The following days turned into a race for survival. Amara sought jobs in street markets, washing dishes in makeshift bars in Lagos alleys, carrying heavy crates for a few naira. She quickly learned that a tired body could also be currency, and that dignity had to be fiercely protected. Often she returned home with just a few coins in her pocket, but enough to ensure a plate of rice for Chinaza. The contrast was cruel. While her former classmates shared notebooks and plans for university, Amara learned to navigate the harsh reality of underpaid work and invisibility. Yet, even amidst the chaos, a spark refused to die. At night, when her sister slept, Amara pored over old books borrowed from neighbors or saved from school. She read in secret, as if refusing to let her mind become a slave to poverty. She devoured stories of colonial Nigeria, tidbits about writers like Chinua Achebe and Wole Soyinka, and even copied English phrases, dreaming of speaking fluently one day. Those stolen moments of exhaustion were like breaths of hope, but each page also reminded her that her dreams were growing ever further from reality. The persistence in finding better work became routine. For months, Amara roamed the streets of central Lagos, knocking on company doors, handing out handwritten resumes, begging for a chance. Often, she was rejected with a single glance. Her clothes were too simple for the shine of glass-walled offices, but her perseverance never waned. She carried a single photo of Chinaza smiling in her pocket, and whenever someone humiliated her, she looked at it in silence, as if saying to herself, "I can't give up." That small detail became fuel on days of rejection. On a stifling morning, when she was close to giving up, an unexpected opportunity arose. A tall building in the heart of Victoria Island was hiring a secretary. Amara knew she didn't have suitable clothes, but she borrowed a simple dress from a neighbor and presented herself with the firmest posture she could muster. The interview was quick, marked by skeptical glances, but one of the managers saw something rare in her: pure determination. Against all odds, Amara got the job. For the first time in months, she returned home with news that filled Chinaza's eyes with hope. But little could she imagine that this job would become the stage for even greater pain and tougher choices. Stepping into the luxurious office was like crossing into a parallel world. The cold air conditioning, leather furniture, and the scent of expensive coffee contrasted with the stifling heat of her simple home in Surulere. Amara felt that every step revealed the social abyss she lived in. While colleagues chatted about trips to London and designer clothes, she thought about how to turn part of her salary into medicine and food for her sister. The difference between their worlds was cruel, but it also showed her how much she still had to fight to avoid being swallowed by inequality. The simple secretary's uniform hid a soul marked by battles no one there could imagine. To others, she was just another employee. To herself, she was living proof that every sacrifice had been worth it. But life, ever relentless, wouldn't let this small victory be celebrated for long. Soon, fate would place Amara before a new abyss, where dignity and survival would collide in a brutal way. How many people do you know who had to give up school to put food on the table? Share in the comments, because this community is a space for support and connection. Your voice might be the comfort another heart needs. The office where Amara began working wasn't just glass walls and luxury furniture. It was also known as a place where only the toughest survived. At the top of that hierarchy was Obinna Okafor, heir to one of Lagos's most influential families. Young, handsome, and always featured in gossip columns, he was known for two extremes: a natural talent for business and the cruelty with which he treated employees. His arrogance had driven many to quit within their first month, but no one dared confront him directly. It was in this environment that Amara's path began to intertwine with his. Obinna frequented lavish parties in Victoria Island, drove imported cars, and was surrounded by friends equally dazzled by their own wealth. Meanwhile, Amara arrived at work in modest clothes, with simple notebooks and a quiet urgency. The difference between their worlds was stark. For him, every night was a spectacle of loud music, champagne, and women vying for his attention. For her, every minute was about getting home early to cook dinner for Chinaza. Two universes so physically close, yet separated by chasms of reality. This contradiction was about to spark something unexpected. Obinna had a habit of roaming the office unannounced, just to test employees. He enjoyed catching mistakes, humiliating people publicly, and proving no one was on his level. Many trembled at the sound of his expensive shoes clicking on the marble floor. Amara, however, rarely let herself be intimidated, not out of boldness, but distraction. Her thoughts were almost always occupied with the next electricity bill, her sister's health, or saving for dinner. This indifference made her curiously different to Obinna. While others scrambled to impress him, she barely noticed his presence, and that, precisely, caught his attention. One morning during a packed meeting, Obinna interrupted an employee's speech just to mock a mispronounced English word. Nervous laughter echoed in the room. Amara, tasked with taking notes, remained steady, her eyes fixed on her notebook. It wasn't disrespect, but focus. This intrigued Obinna. Used to being the center of attention, he found it strange not to see even a hint of fear in this young woman. It was in that subtle detail that curiosity began to grow, though he didn't yet know how to name what he felt. The power he wielded over others seemed to have no effect on her. In the hallways, colleagues gossiped about the boss's glamorous life. Stories circulated about parties in Banana Island mansions, spontaneous trips to Dubai, and relationships that lasted less than a week. To Amara, these tales were mere noise. While others fed their curiosity, her focus was on carefully noting Obinna's requests, finishing tasks, and leaving the building as quickly as possible. This lack of interest was a shock to someone like Obinna, used to women swooning in his presence. In that silence, he noticed something different, a simple, understated beauty that was impossible to ignore. It was a beauty without expensive makeup or imported clothes. Her hair was tied back practically. Her skin glowed only with health, and her steady eyes rarely wavered from the task at hand. Obinna, who had always been surrounded by luxury, found this simplicity unsettling. As someone who never had to struggle, he couldn't comprehend where her quiet strength came from. Each time he watched Amara hurry out of the office, as if racing against time, a new restlessness stirred within him, and perhaps it was her very indifference that was about to become a powerful force in their dynamic. But fate is cruel when it decides to intertwine unlikely paths. While Obinna began to see Amara in a new light, she remained blind to any signals from him. There was no time for flirtation or romantic daydreams. Her life was a cycle of responsibilities. Her heart was entirely devoted to Chinaza. This invisible barrier only deepened Obinna's curiosity, as for the first time, he didn't know how to handle a lack of control. It was only the beginning of a dangerous game where power, sacrifice, and emotions would collide brutally. What if the boss who humiliates everyone started seeing something in you that you don't even see yourself? Comment here. Do you believe indifference can be more powerful than beauty? Your opinion could spark a debate that moves many. 4 weeks after starting at the luxurious office, Amara began to feel a small sense of relief. Bills were more organized, Chinaza attended school with fewer worries, and for the first time in years, hope seemed to make a timid return to their lives. It was precisely in this moment of respite that fate decided to exact an even crueler price. A phone call in the middle of the workday changed everything. The school principal, with a trembling voice, informed her that Chinaza had fainted during class and was rushed to a nearby hospital. Her heart raced as if it might burst from her chest. Amara abandoned her desk without asking permission, ignoring the confused stares of her colleagues. She took a crowded bus, pleaded with strangers to make way, and ran through the streets of Lagos with tears streaming uncontrollably. Each second felt like an eternity, and one thought pounded in her mind: please, let it not be serious. But the heavy silence of the hospital upon her arrival revealed that her plea was about to be crushed. In the cold room, the doctors didn't take long to reveal the truth. Chinaza had been diagnosed with advanced leukemia, a disease requiring immediate and extremely expensive treatment. Amara's world collapsed in silence. The sounds around her faded, as if she were submerged underwater. The floor seemed to pull her down, and only her sister's stifled sobs from the hospital bed brought her back to reality. Fear was no longer a distant shadow. It now sat beside them, smiling cruelly. The doctor explained calmly, but each word was a blow. Treatment, chemotherapy, hospitalizations, imported medications, costs that far exceeded any realistic chance of payment. The first phase alone would cost more than Amara could save in years as a secretary. With every figure mentioned, hope dissolved further. Lagos, despite its vibrancy and modernity, is still a city where quality healthcare feels like a privilege, not a right. In that moment, Amara realized the fight wasn't just against the disease, but also against the system. As she watched her sister sleep, connected to tubes and monitors, memories of their childhood flooded her mind. Chinaza running down a dirt road laughing loudly, stories told by candlelight during power outages, promises whispered in front of their mother's photo. Now that entire past seemed at risk of being erased by an invisible illness, stealing her strength. Amara held her sister's hand tightly, as if trying to keep life from slipping through her fingers. In the hospital corridor, she overheard other parents talking about selling land, asking churches for help, or turning to distant wealthy relatives to fund similar treatments. It was a harsh reality. In many Nigerian families, the fight against serious illness isn't just physical, but also a battle against the poverty surrounding every attempt at survival. Amara had no land, no wealthy relatives, not even a support network. All she had was courage and the promise never to abandon her sister. But how far could that promise take her? The return home that night felt like a living funeral. The noisy bus, relentless horns and stifling heat contrasted with the sepulchral silence in her mind. Every passing face seemed distant, as if the entire world had moved on while their lives stood still. The question echoing in her mind was simple but devastating. How could she save the only person she had left without money, support, or time? This was the crossroads that would mark the beginning of the most painful decisions of her life. Imagine getting a call from school and finding out your greatest treasure has a nearly untreatable illness. What would you do in that position? Comment now. Your voice might resonate with many who faced such moments. The days following the diagnosis were a race against time. Amara didn't allow herself to rest. Each morning began with endless lists of places where she might find help. Banks, credit unions, even pawn shops. At every door she knocked on, she faced skeptical looks. Employees asked for collateral, guarantors, or property to pawn. Her answer was always the same. She had nothing but her sick sister and her own willingness to work. The cold silence of each rejection weighed like a sentence, and with every return home, her body felt lighter only because her heart grew heavier. She tried neighbor after neighbor. Some said they couldn't help. Others closed the door before she could finish speaking. Childhood friends, now distant, offered only messages of sympathy, but none could provide concrete help. In urban communities like Lagos, where everyone is already fighting for their own survival, asking for money can feel like an impossible burden. Amara learned this the hard way. There were no outstretched hands. The isolation was even crueler than the poverty, and the clock kept ticking. With each hospital visit, Chinaza's condition seemed to worsen. Doctors stressed the urgency of chemotherapy, warning that every day without treatment increased the risk. Amara watched her sister's skin lose its glow, her smile fade, and felt life slipping away before her eyes. It was like watching a fire burn without water to put it out. The tears held back during the day erupted in silence when she returned to an empty house. The feeling of powerlessness gnawed at her from within. In that desperation, the weight of loneliness became suffocating. It was at this breaking point that a dangerous idea emerged, asking her boss for help. Obinna wasn't just the arrogant heir of the company. He was a man surrounded by luxury, parties, and excess wealth. The mere thought of speaking to him sent chills through her body. She remembered all the times she'd seen him humiliate employees, how he wielded arrogance like a weapon. Even so, her sister's life was at stake, and shame seemed small in the face of death. Determined, she spent nights rehearsing what to say, never finding words that felt right. Courage only came when she realized there was no other way out. The next day, she entered his office with hesitant steps. The room exuded wealth, imported wooden furniture, expensive perfumes mixed with the scent of fresh coffee. Obinna received her with his usual air of superiority, as if he already knew someone was about to beg for something. Amara vaguely explained that she needed an urgent loan without revealing the reason. Her voice trembled, her gaze avoided his. It wasn't just a request for money, it was a plea for salvation. But instead of compassion, she met a gaze filled with curiosity and coldness. Obinna leaned forward, resting his arms on the desk, and calmly asked how much she needed. He listened attentively, but his eyes gleamed with something more, the opportunity to exert power in its cruelest form. When silence filled the room, he made a proposal that froze Amara's blood. The money would be available, but in exchange for a night with him. The shock paralyzed every muscle in her body. It was as if the world stopped in that moment. Her dignity was ripped from her hands without warning, replaced by a sentence disguised as help. Her heart raced, but her legs felt glued to the floor. Amara couldn't respond immediately. Words vanished, as if her throat had closed. The weight of that proposal wasn't just financial, it was moral, spiritual, and human. Her sister's life was at risk, but to save her, she would have to lose herself. The dilemma became an abyss. Accepting meant violating her soul. Refusing meant signing Chinaza's death sentence. And as silence lingered in the room, Obinna kept his gaze fixed, certain he had cornered her with no escape. What if the only way to save the one you love was to accept a cruel deal that would destroy your soul? What would you do in that place? Comment now, because this isn't just Amara's story. It's the silent dilemma of many around the world. The silence after the proposal was louder than any scream. Amara sat motionless as if her body had turned to stone. Her mind spun in circles. Running was her first instinct, but the image of Chinaza lying in a hospital bed loomed like a constant shadow, crushing any impulse to refuse. Her heart begged for dignity, while the memory of her sister, hooked to tubes and machines, demanded sacrifice. The dilemma wasn't between right and wrong, it was between life and death. In the office bathroom locked in a narrow stall, tears fell without permission. She tried to look at herself in the cracked mirror, but her own image frightened her. She no longer recognized the young woman who dreamed of studying, who made up stories to cheer her sister. Now she saw someone cornered, about to sell her soul for a chance. How many women in the world had faced similar dilemmas in silence, never telling a soul? That realization deepened her pain. The sacrifice wouldn't just be personal, it would be invisible, without witnesses. At night, sitting by Chinaza's hospital bed, she held her sister's hand tightly. The girl, though frail, smiled between bouts of pain, as if trying to protect Amara from the weight of their struggle. That innocent smile was the final barrier that fell. The cruel certainty took shape. To save that life, she would have to destroy her own. The decision solidified in silent tears, the kind that don't show in public but carve scars on the soul. There was no turning back, only the certainty that crossing this line would change her forever. The walk home that night felt like slow motion. The city's lights blinked, horns blared, but everything seemed distant. Inside her, another sound dominated, the cry of dignity begging for help, and the echo of the promise made years ago at her mother's grave. She would keep that vow, even if it meant losing herself. This mix of pain, love, and sacrifice sealed Amara's fate and set the stage for one of the darkest nights of her story. What if love for the only person you have in the world demanded an impossible price? What would you do in that place? Comment now, because your response might echo the voices of many who faced choices no one imagines. The chosen room felt more like a showcase of opulence than an intimate space. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light on red velvet curtains, imported wooden furniture, and perfectly aligned silk sheets. The contrast was cruel. For Amara, every luxurious detail felt like irony, a reminder that this night wasn't a choice but an imposition. Her heart raced, not with desire but with fear. Each step toward the bed carried the weight of centuries, as if her dignity was being dragged along with her. Yet she pressed forward, because behind that door lay the price of her sister's life. Obinna, accustomed to control, watched her like a conquest. He treated the situation as a transaction, a silent contract sealed by inequality. His confident hands didn't notice the tremor in Amara's body. He didn't see the shattered soul, only the physical presence. But as he advanced in this power game, something began to unsettle him, the absence of surrender. There was no desire, no seduction, only tears hidden in the corners of her eyes, which she tried to wipe away unnoticed. That simple detail was like a mirror reflecting his own coldness. For Amara, every minute was an abyss. She closed her eyes, seeking refuge in memories of Chinaza as a child, running down a dirt road smiling with innocence. She used those memories as armor to endure the weight of shame. But the more she tried to distance herself mentally, the more her body betrayed her resistance. Silent tears fell, leaving invisible marks on the pillow. For the first time, she felt reduced to something less than a person, a possession. Deep down, she knew this night would leave scars that time could never erase. Obinna, for the first time in years, realized he had crossed a line he never imagined, The coldness that always defined him began to crack in the face of her vulnerability. It wasn't Amara's body that disarmed him, but the silent weight of her pain. With every stolen glance, he saw not a conquest, but a wound. This awakening wasn't love yet, but it was the start of a fracture in the arrogant man who thought he had everything under control. Dawn arrived heavily, with light invading the room like an unwelcome witness. Amara rose in silence, avoiding the mirror, as if unable to bear the reflection of someone she no longer recognized. Obinna remained silent, watching, unable to find words that made sense. The deal had been fulfilled, but the lingering feeling wasn't victory. It was an invisible defeat for both. In that luxurious room, a contradiction began to form, one that would forever change their relationship. The union of power and vulnerability. With the money in hand, the first rounds of chemotherapy finally began. The hospital's cold environment felt less threatening as Amara watched Chinasa receive the medications that could restore hope. Each visit was marked by fragile smiles, as if the two were trying to convince each other that everything would be okay. But though the treatment brought some relief, the weight of the choice she made lingered like a shadow on her soul. It was as if every step taken to save her sister had opened an invisible wound within her. In the office, the atmosphere had changed. The respectful silence that once surrounded Amara gave way to whispers in the corridors. Colleagues exchanged sidelong glances, commenting on her sudden luck and insinuating she received special treatment from the boss. None knew the truth, but envy always weaves its own stories. The pressure of these rumors was as suffocating as her sister's diagnosis. The job that had been a refuge from poverty became a stage for silent humiliations. Yet Amara endured it all, because the only thing that mattered was keeping Chinasa alive. Obinna, keeping his distance, feigned indifference. He maintained his haughty posture with the team, but something in him had shifted. He began noticing details he'd previously ignored. Amara's tired eyes, her trembling hands as she typed, her frequent rushed exits to answer phone calls. The man, accustomed to judging people by appearances, felt a curiosity that went beyond desire. He needed to understand where her silent strength came from, why she didn't break under the weight of malicious stares. His arrogance slowly gave way to unease. One afternoon he decided to follow her discreetly after work. His luxurious car, with tinted windows, kept its distance as he watched her hurry through Lagos's streets. At every corner, he noted the contrast between his life of abundance and the world Amara navigated. Narrow alleys, modest homes, makeshift markets. She didn't stop at expensive cafes or shiny malls. She went straight to the hospital. In that moment, Obinna realized he was about to discover something that would completely change how he saw this woman. From outside, he watched through the window as Amara adjusted her sister's pillow, wiped her sweaty forehead, and smiled despite tear-filled eyes. There was no luxury, no pretense, just genuine devotion. For the first time, the party-loving heir, the arrogant man who believed the world revolved around him, saw the real pain hidden behind that fragile figure. The discovery wasn't just a shock, it was a mirror. For the first time, Obinna felt his own coldness shatter in the face of Amara's silent strength. What if those who judge you knew the truth behind your silence? What would you do? Hide it to the end, or reveal the pain you carry? Comment now, because your response might resonate with many hearts here. The first changes were almost imperceptible. Obinna, used to flaunting sports cars and partying until dawn, began disappearing from social events. Friends questioned his absence, unaware that he now spent parts of his nights in silence at hospitals, watching a girl he barely knew from a distance. He didn't approach Amara to avoid being seen, only leaving discreet envelopes with payments for exams, medications, and extra chemotherapy sessions. It was his way of making amends, albeit in secret. Slowly, the coldness that defined him began to crack. In the office, his demeanor shifted too. The public humiliations that were once common gave way to firm but less cruel orders. Employees noticed the new tone. Some even suspected a hidden romance, but none could imagine the root of the transformation. What was once arrogance began to resemble respect. Obinna observed more, spoke less, and even listened to opinions he once ignored. It was as if his silent connection with Amara had instilled in him a new awareness, something no amount of money could buy, and this change held even greater consequences. His discreet hospital visits became routine. Sometimes he stood outside, watching through the small window of the room. He saw Amara adjust blankets, feed Chinaza with patience, and tell stories to distract her sister between treatments. That maternal care disarmed him more than any words. As someone who always had everything, he'd never stopped to consider the beauty of sacrifice. Seeing this young woman fight poverty with such courage was like looking into an inverted mirror. The more strength he saw in her, the more he recognized his own inner weakness. One night, a simple detail etched itself in his memory forever. Chinaza, though weakened, smiled as Amara softly sang an old lullaby, the same one Ngozi used to sing before she passed. The sound was gentle, but carried centuries of resilience. Obinna felt something unfamiliar, a lump in his throat, a longing to be part of something real. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about business, money, or parties. He was thinking only of how a woman with nothing could carry a treasure he could never buy. Back at the office, he began protecting her without her noticing. He shut down gossip, intercepted criticisms, and prevented superiors from overloading her. He didn't want recognition, only to ease her burden. But each hidden gesture deepened his transformation. The arrogant, party-loving air was slowly giving way to someone learning the value of silence, empathy, and true strength. The man who once only knew how to accumulate wealth was now discovering the power of giving, and this quiet change was about to turn their lives upside down. What if the arrogant one everyone judged heartless began to transform into someone capable of giving everything in silence? Do you believe in this change, or is it just a facade? Comment now. Your opinion could spark a powerful debate here. Every change disrupts those who profit from chaos. Obinna's transformation, now more human and attentive, didn't go unnoticed in the company. Among those watching from afar was Adana Okori, Anne's influential partner, a woman of declared ambition who had always set her sights on the heir. Wealthy, elegant, and accustomed to getting what she wanted, she couldn't stand the idea of losing ground to someone like Amara, a mere secretary with no prestigious surname, no inheritance, no status. From that wounded pride, a silent plot was born, one that would turn into persecution. Adana began subtly. She assigned Amara tasks with impossible deadlines, criticized flawless reports just to wear her down, and spread malicious comments about supposed privileges. In the corridors, her venom spread quickly. The young woman, already facing colleagues' whispers, now bore the mark of distrust fueled by one of the company's most powerful voices. The fear of losing her job grew, not just out of pride, but because it would mean halting her sister's treatment. With each new humiliation, Amara wondered how much longer she could endure. What Adana couldn't bear was Obinna's gaze. Though he tried to maintain a serious and distant demeanor, every sign showed he no longer saw Amara as just an employee. This realization ignited a silent, almost obsessive anger in Adana. She knew the corporate world well and could manipulate meetings, reports, and decisions to set traps. It was like a chess game where Amara always seemed one move from checkmate. Each move brought more pressure to the young woman, who barely slept, torn between the struggle at home and the war at work. Amara lived in a constant cycle of fear. By day, she faced judgmental stares and traps that could cost her job. By night at the hospital, she whispered promises to her sister that she'd never give up. It was as if two simultaneous battles were draining her, one against the disease threatening Chinaza's life, another against the envy threatening her dignity. The loneliness, Rosetta Stone, once familiar, now felt even more suffocating. The dilemma was clear. Resisting meant enduring pain no salary could justify, but giving up meant condemning her sister to the worst fate. Obinna, noticing the disguised attacks, began to pay closer attention. He didn't reveal his stance yet, but with each of Adana's cruel moves, his indignation grew. The man who once ignored corporate intrigues now felt his heart beat differently. It wasn't just corporate justice, it was personal. The arrogant man who once let the world revolve around his ego began to feel the need to protect someone who meant far more than he'd realized. This shift set the stage for a confrontation no one expected. The tension in the company reached an unbearable peak. Adana's veiled accusations, hallway whispers, and traps had backed Amara into a corner. Meetings were conducted with hostility, flawless reports were questioned, and every minor mistake was magnified as proof of incompetence. To many, she seemed just a suspected employee. To Amara, it was her dignity crumbling before eyes that judged her without knowing the truth. The pressure, mounted daily until a public confrontation became inevitable. During a meeting with directors and partners, Adana seized the moment, insinuating with calculated elegance that Amara remained in the company for personal reasons tied to the heir. Her words, spoken in a refined tone, cut like knives. The silence that followed was suffocating. Amara's gaze faltered, her face burned with shame, and her breath caught in her chest. For the first time, she felt everything she'd fought for was about to collapse in seconds. But no one expected what came next. Obinna stood up firmly, silencing the growing murmurs. His posture was different from the arrogance that once defined him. His voice carried a weight, not of power, but of truth. He didn't just defend Amara. He revealed to everyone that his closeness to her wasn't a whim, but something deeper. He had fallen in love with her. He admitted his past mistakes shamed him and declared it was time to right those wrongs. The impact was immediate. The partners, used to the untouchable, arrogant Obinna, saw a man stripped of masks for the first time. His words struck like a hammer. Adana, expecting applause for her accusations, was stunned. The game she'd orchestrated turned against her. Employees, once steeped in gossip, witnessed an unexpected reversal. Obinna's courage in publicly admitting his feelings and owning his mistakes dismantled the narrative against Amara. For the first time, she wasn't alone in her fight. Someone was willing to risk their reputation to defend her. This role reversal marked the beginning of Adana's downfall. Internal investigations uncovered Adana's manipulations, sabotages, and lies aimed at destroying Amara. Forged documents, tampered reports, and orchestrated schemes were exposed as part of her plan. The mask of the influential partner fell before everyone. Humiliated, she was quietly removed from the company, her prestige in ruins. Her venomous schemes turned into her judgment, and her ambition crumbled. Amara, meanwhile, regained not only her job, but the dignity nearly stolen by injustice. As the corporate storm subsided, a new hope bloomed in the hospital. Chinaza's treatment began to show results. Color returned to her face. Her eyes regained their spark, and her smile, once dimmed by pain, returned in small gestures. Each improvement reminded Amara that her sacrifices hadn't been in vain. The unbearable burden began to feel like a breath of relief. For the first time in years, Amara could walk without the crushing weight of loneliness. Her relationship with Obinna didn't begin like a fairy tale. There were no flowers or grand romantic gestures. What existed was rarer, respect forged through shared suffering. He, who once believed power meant inspiring fear, learned that true strength comes from empathy. She, who thought survival was all that remained, discovered there was still room to be loved with dignity. What began as a cruel deal born of inequality and pain transformed into an unlikely story of redemption and love. Some stories don't come from easy choices, but from sacrifices that leave lasting scars. Amara didn't fight to win the pride of a powerful man. She fought to save her sister's life. And in the silence of her pain, she transformed even the coldest heart. Because when dignity meets courage, injustice loses its power. What began as a cruel deal ended as proof that true love can rise even from the shadows. New stories await to move you. Click the video beside and dive into another unforgettable journey. Until then,